When Shaquille O'Neal walked onto the floor of Pinnacle Motor Group in Orlando, Florida, on the afternoon of a Tuesday in September, the showroom was the kind of place that had been designed to make certain people feel like they had arrived, and certain other people feel like they had wandered in by mistake. The floors were polished concrete, gray and seamless. The lighting was the kind that costs money to appear effortless. 8 vehicles sat on raised platforms at precise angles, each one lit from below like an exhibit. There was a fragrance, something cedar and faint, pumped through the ventilation system, and a low ambient sound that was almost music but not quite, engineered to suggest taste without asserting it. The kind of place where the price tags faced away from you and the salespeople wore suits without ties. And the implicit message of every surface was that if you needed to ask, you already knew the answer. Shaq walked in off the street. He was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt, the kind with no logo, washed so many times the fabric had gone thin at the shoulders. Dark track pants with a small bleach spot near the left knee. White sneakers, clean but old, the sole beginning to separate at the left toe. A baseball cap, dark green, pulled low. He had driven himself in a car that he had parked 2 blocks away and walked from. Because he did this sometimes, because his mother had told him once that you learn more about a place from its first 10 seconds than from anything that comes after. And she was almost always right. He was also, at this moment, in the market for a car. Not for himself. For a program his foundation ran in Orlando that needed a vehicle. Something practical, reliable, large enough to carry equipment and kids. He had pulled up the dealership on his phone 40 minutes ago because a former teammate had mentioned it in passing. He had driven over. He had walked in. Nobody moved. The showroom had 4 salespeople visible. 2 were at a workstation at the back, talking to each other with the posture of people who have decided the afternoon is over. 1 was on the phone, standing near the window, watching the street with the orientation of someone waiting for something more promising to arrive. 1, a man in a charcoal suit, silver tie pin, shoes that had been polished that morning, was standing near the closest raised platform, a black luxury SUV occupying the light above him. He looked at Shaq when the door opened. He looked at the sweatshirt. He looked back at the SUV. He did not move. Shaq walked the showroom. He looked at the vehicles on the platforms. He read the placards. He ran one hand along the door panel of a white sedan near the window, not because he wanted the white sedan, but because touching things is one way of being present in a room. He looked at the specifications on a dark green coupe near the back. He stood in front of a large silver SUV on the center platform, the kind of vehicle the foundation program could use. And he read the placard carefully and then stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting to see if anyone would come. He noticed 3 things during the waiting. First, at the receptionist's desk near the entrance, a small framed photograph sat beside the phone. A child, maybe 8 years old, in a youth basketball uniform, holding a ball against his hip with the practiced ease of someone who has been holding one long enough that it has become natural. The photograph had not been placed there recently. The frame had a thin line of dust along the top edge. Second, along the far wall, above a row of filing cabinets, there was a banner, not new, slightly curled at the right corner, that read, Pinnacle Motor Group, built on trust since 1987. Below the founding year, in smaller letters that required proximity to read, family owned, community first. Third, through the glass door at the back of the showroom that led to the service bay, in a brief gap between the passing of 2 technicians, he saw a woman sitting in a plastic chair against the wall, with her coat folded in her lap and her hands folded over her coat. She was not moving. She was the particular kind of still that people achieve when they have been waiting so long that waiting has stopped feeling like a temporary condition. He noted all 3. He stood at the center platform. He waited. Now here is what the 4 salespeople in that showroom did not know, and what the woman in the service bay was only beginning to understand, and what a man named Roy Sutter had written in a letter 17 years ago that had never been sent, and that was sitting in a filing cabinet in the back office under a folder labeled Miscellaneous in handwriting that had since changed. The Pinnacle Motor Group had a buyer. The sale had been in negotiation for 6 weeks through a commercial real estate intermediary that also handled business acquisitions, and it had been structured in a way that kept the acquiring party's identity behind 2 layers of holding company until the paperwork was ready. The paperwork was not yet ready. The acquiring party was standing on the showroom floor in a faded gray sweatshirt, having decided that a Tuesday afternoon in September was a reasonable time to see the operation before the operation knew it was being seen. And the woman in the plastic chair in the service bay had driven 40 minutes to pick up a vehicle that the service department had told her 3 weeks ago would be ready in 5 days. And it was not ready. And nobody from the service department had called her. And she had been sitting in that chair for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Stay with us for the full video, because what happened at Pinnacle Motor Group on a Tuesday afternoon in September rearranged 6 lives and answered a question that had been sitting in a filing cabinet for 17 years. And the answer was not about cars at all. Shaquille O'Neal was born in Newark, New Jersey on the 6th of March, 1972. And his mother, Lucille, was 21 years old and had grown up in a city that was not patient with pretense, which meant she was not patient with it either, and neither, eventually, was he. She was 5 feet 3 inches, and she had the kind of stillness under pressure that is not the absence of feeling, but its most disciplined form. She could be furious and appear completely calm, and only the people who knew her well enough could tell the difference, which was a small group by design. She had one thing she said about money, about the performance of it, about the way certain people used wealth as a screen between themselves and the obligation to treat other people well. She said it at the dinner table when something had come up that warranted it, and she said it simply, without drama. Having it doesn't mean anything. What you do with it is the whole story. She said it when Shaq was 10, and she said it when he was 22, and she did not need to say it after that, because it was already the architecture of how he thought about the question. His stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, was a man who had grown up with very little and had built something stable and decent through discipline and consistency, and a refusal to let the size of what he had determine the size of how he behaved. He had a particular response to moments where someone had been dismissed or overlooked or treated as though their time and presence did not register. He would observe it. He would say nothing in the moment, and then afterward, in private, he would say to Shaq, "Remember that. Remember exactly how that felt. And then make sure you are never the one making someone else feel it." He had been gone for 9 years. The instruction had not. What came after is the architecture of a remarkable life moving too fast for anyone telling. Newark, Cole High School, LSU, Orlando, Los Angeles, Miami, 4 championships, 3 MVPs, a television career, a business portfolio that had branched into 47 categories. The acquisition of Pinnacle Motor Group had been initiated not through any grand strategy, but through a conversation, 8 months earlier, with a woman named Vanessa Cole, who ran a workforce re-entry program in Orlando, and who had told him, over coffee, that the single greatest obstacle her clients faced after completing the program was transportation. Specifically, the experience of walking into a dealership without the right clothes or the right credit profile, and being made to feel that the door they had just opened was not meant for them. He had listened to her for 40 minutes. He had driven to 3 dealerships in Orlando that week, in different clothes on different days, and kept notes on his phone. Pinnacle had been the 3rd dealership on the 3rd day, and it had been instructive in ways that he had written down carefully and had not forgotten. His name was Glenn Radford. He was 41 years old, and he had been the top-performing salesperson at Pinnacle Motor Group for 6 consecutive years, which was a fact he knew with the specificity of someone who has organized a significant portion of their identity around it. He had grown up in a suburb of Tampa, the son of a contractor who had built the business up from nothing, and sold it before the market turned and retired at 58 to a house on a lake in Central Florida. And Glenn had watched this happen and had absorbed with the totality of a child watching a parent succeed the lesson that success was a form of discernment, that you invested your energy where the return was most certain, and you moved on quickly from the situations that did not meet the threshold. He had been managing the floor this afternoon with the particular fatigue of a Tuesday in September, when the morning had produced nothing and the afternoon was looking similar. He had a quarterly review in 2 weeks. His numbers were fine. They were not where he wanted them to be. He had seen the man in the sweatshirt come in. He had made his assessment. He had returned his attention to the SUV platform and the task of keeping his shoes looking like they had been polished that morning, which they had been. By the time 45 minutes had passed, the man in the sweatshirt was still on the floor. Glenn was aware of this. He was aware in the way you are aware of something that your reasoning has categorized as not requiring action. A low-frequency awareness, background, not demanding. By the time an hour had passed and the man was still there, the frequency had risen slightly. By the time an hour and 40 minutes had passed and the man had sat down in one of the waiting chairs near the window and was looking at his phone with the unhurried patience of someone who has nowhere more important to be, the frequency was no longer background. By the time 3 hours had passed, by the time the afternoon light had shifted and the other salespeople had cycled through their various disappearances and reappearances, and the showroom had acquired the particular quality of a place that has forgotten someone is in it, Glenn Radford had done something that was going to take him a long time to examine cleanly. He had waited out a man who was waiting for him. The person who moved first was not a salesperson. Her name was Deja Morris. She was 24 years old and had been the receptionist at Pinnacle Motor Group for 8 months. Hired after completing a workforce re-entry program that had helped her find stable employment after a period she described to her mother as a detour and to herself as an education. She had been at the front desk all afternoon. She had watched the man in the sweatshirt come in. She had watched the floor. She had watched the hour become 2 hours become 3. She had picked up her phone twice to call someone and put it back down once each time. Because she was 8 months into a job she needed, and she understood the arithmetic of that clearly. The third time she picked up the phone, she did not put it down. She called the floor manager's extension. She said, "There's a customer who's been on the floor for 3 hours. I think someone should help him." She said it in the level voice of someone who has decided that the cost of saying a thing is lower than the cost of not saying it. She hung up. The floor manager, a man named Pete, who was 53 and tired in the way that people get tired when they have been managing other people's decisions for long enough, came out of the back office, looked at the man in the waiting chair, looked at Glenn, and said, across the showroom floor, in a voice that was not quiet, "Glenn. Customer." Glenn crossed the floor. He arrived at the waiting chair with his hands in his pockets and his expression arranged into the professional warmth of someone performing a function they have performed 10,000 times. He said, "Sorry about the wait, sir. Can I help you find something today?" The man in the sweatshirt looked up at him. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I've been here for 3 hours. Glenn said, "I apologize for that, sir. It's been a busy afternoon." The man looked around the showroom, the 4 visible salespeople, the unhurried afternoon light, the polished concrete, the cedar fragrance, the ambient sound that was almost music. He said, "What's your name?" "Glenn." "Glenn, I want to buy a car." "Of course." "What are you looking for today?" "I want to buy a car," the man said again, "for a program that puts kids in after-school activities in this city. I need something practical. Seats 8 minimum, reliable, clearance for equipment, budget flexible." He paused. "And then I want to talk to you about every other vehicle on this floor." Glenn looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes. Not recognition yet. Not quite, but its immediate neighbor. He said, "Every other vehicle." "Every other vehicle," the man said. He stood up. The process of a 7'1" man rising from a waiting chair in a car showroom is not a subtle event, and one of the two salespeople at the back workstation stopped talking, and the salesperson by the window turned from the street, and Pete, from the doorway of the back office, went very still. Glenn looked at the man's face. He looked at the baseball cap, pulled low. He did the arithmetic that had been available to him for 3 hours and had not been completed until this moment. And when it completed, the expression that arrived was not quite shame and not quite panic, but it was traveling in both directions simultaneously and not making progress in either. Before anyone could say anything else, the glass door to the service bay opened and the woman came through. She was 58 years old. Her name was Adeline Sutter. She had driven 40 minutes to pick up the vehicle that the service department had told her 3 weeks ago would be ready in 5 days. And it was not ready. And she had been sitting in the plastic chair for 2 hours and 40 minutes and had finally gotten up because sitting had stopped feeling like action. And she needed to be standing when she said what she was going to say. She came through the glass door and she went to the service desk and she said, in the voice of someone who has been patient, past the point where patience is the right strategy, "My name is Adeline Sutter. My car has been here for 3 weeks. I was told it would be ready in 5 days. I have been sitting in your service bay for almost 3 hours. I would like to know what is happening." The service desk person, young, 21, first job, looked at the computer. He looked at the screen. He said, "Mrs. Sutter, I can see the note here. It looks like the part came in last week, but there was a delay in 3 weeks," she said. 5 days became 3 weeks. "I am a 72-year-old woman." She stopped. She was not 72. She was 58. She said, "I've been patient. I need my car." From the showroom floor, Shaq had heard all of this through the glass. He walked to the service desk. He stood beside Adeline Sutter, who looked up at him, the full 7 feet of him, with the expression of someone who has run out of the energy required for surprise. He said to the service desk person, "What does she need to have her car today?" The desk person looked at the computer. The part is in, it just needs to be installed. It's a 2-hour job, but we're at capacity today, so who makes the decision about capacity?" Pete had appeared. He said, "I do." Shaq looked at him. "Then, make the decision." Pete looked at Adeline Sutter. He looked at the computer screen. He said, "We'll have it done by 6. She said, "Thank you." She said it without warmth, which was correct. Shaq walked back to the showroom. He stood at the center platform, the large silver SUV above him. He looked at Glenn. He said, "My name is Shaquille O'Neal." He said it the way you say something that is going to rearrange a room. "I'm in the process of acquiring this dealership. The paperwork closes in 3 weeks." He let that sit for 4 full seconds. "I spent this afternoon on your floor because I wanted to see it before it knew I was coming." Another pause. "Now I've seen it." Glenn stood very still. "I'm not here to fire anyone," Shaq said. I'm here to buy some cars and then have a conversation about what this place is going to become. He looked at the banner above the filing cabinets. Built on trust since 1987. Family-owned. Community first. He looked back. That banner has been there since 1987. I want to know if the building still means it. He turned to Deja at the reception desk. He said, "You called the floor manager?" She looked at him. "Yes." "How long did you wait before you called?" She was quiet for a moment. "Too long," she said. "Why?" She looked at the desk. She looked back up. "Because I needed the job, and I wasn't sure what it would cost me." "What did you decide?" "That not calling would cost me more," she said. He nodded. He turned back to Glenn. He said, "I'll take the silver SUV on the center platform for the foundation program." He looked at the showroom, all 8 vehicles, the platforms, the lighting engineered to imply desire. "Walk me through the rest of the floor." Glenn walked him through the rest of the floor. It took 45 minutes. At the end of the 45 minutes, Shaq had put deposits on 6 additional vehicles. 2 for the Foundation's expanded program fleet, 2 for a workforce reentry program that needed reliable transport for clients, and 2 that he had bought for no reason, he explained, because the limit of what he was doing had not yet revealed itself to him, and he was comfortable with that. Glenn wrote up the paperwork. He wrote it up with the careful attention of someone who understands that what he is doing is not only writing up paperwork. He said at one point, without looking up from the desk, "I should have come over when you came in." Shaq said, "Yes." "I didn't because I know why," Shaq said. "You don't have to explain it to me. You have to explain it to yourself." A pause. "That's the harder one." Glenn was quiet. Then he said, "What happens now?" "Now I own the dealership in 3 weeks, and you have 3 weeks to figure out if you want to work in a place that means what the banner says." He signed the paperwork. "I think you do. But that's your question, not mine." Adeline Sutter's car was ready at 5:47. She was the first person Deja called. When Adeline came back through the service bay door and into the showroom to collect her keys, she passed the reception desk, and Deja stood up and said, "Mrs. Sutter, I'm sorry for the wait. I should have followed up sooner." Adeline looked at her. She said, "Are you the one who called the floor manager?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you did something." She took her keys. "That's more than nothing." In the back office, in a filing cabinet under a folder labeled Miscellaneous, there was a letter that had been written by a man named Roy Sutter in 2006 and never sent. Roy Sutter had been a salesman at Pinnacle Motor Group from 1989 to 2006, when he had retired due to a condition that made standing for long periods difficult. And he had been the top performer in the dealership for 11 of those 17 years. And the letter was addressed to the owner, the original owner, who had founded the place in 1987. And it said, in 3 pages of considered and careful language, that the dealership had begun to drift from the thing it had said it was, that community first had become a phrase rather than a practice, and that he was writing it down because he needed the thought to exist somewhere outside his own head, even if it never reached anyone. He had filed it instead of mailing it, and had retired 4 months later. Roy Sutter had been Adeline Sutter's husband. He had died in 2019. She had come in today to pick up his car, the one he had bought from this dealership in 2004, and that she had kept because getting rid of it had not yet felt like the right thing to do, and possibly never would. Shaq found the letter because Deja found the filing cabinet, because the back office needed to be inventoried before the acquisition closed, and Deja had offered to help because she wanted to understand the place she was working in. She brought the letter to Shaq without reading beyond the first paragraph, because the first paragraph told her it was not hers to read. He read it in full. He sat in the back office on a Tuesday evening in September with the letter in his hands, and he read it twice. Then he found Adeline Sutter's number. It was in the service file for the vehicle, and he called her. She answered on the third ring. He told her about the letter. He read her the last paragraph, which said, "I believe this place could still be what it said it was. I'm just not sure anyone is going to say so out loud." There was a silence on the line. She said, "He never told me he wrote that." "He filed it instead," Shaq said. "Sometimes people put the right thing somewhere safe instead of somewhere useful. I think he meant to send it eventually." Another silence. Then she said, "Are you going to make it what it said it was?" "That's the plan," he said. "Good," she said. She said it the way his mother said things, once, directly, completely. He would have liked that. His mother had said having it doesn't mean anything. What you do with it is the whole story. Philip Harrison had said, remember exactly how that felt. And make sure you are never the one making someone feel it. They had both been pointing at the same thing from different directions. And the thing they were pointing at was this: a showroom floor in Orlando, a woman in a plastic chair, a letter in a filing cabinet, a young woman at a reception desk who called the floor manager because not calling would have cost her more. What you do with it is the whole story. He had driven himself. He had parked 2 blocks away. He had walked in wearing a sweatshirt and waited for 3 hours in a room that did not know what it had. And then he had bought 6 cars for programs that needed them, and 1 car for a man who had written a letter that deserved to arrive somewhere. And on the way back to his own car, he had stopped at the bus stop on Michigan and Meridian to see if the boy named Marcus was still there. He was not. He had gone somewhere. That was the right outcome. A receptionist named Deja Morris was promoted to Customer Experience Manager when the acquisition closed, a title she had not heard of before and that she helped define because the role was new and so was the seriousness with which the dealership intended to mean what the banner said. A salesman named Glenn Radford was still there 3 weeks later, and 6 months after that, and he had become, in the way that people sometimes become things, when a specific moment has reoriented their compass, the person on the floor most likely to cross the showroom first. And a letter written in 2006 and filed instead of sent was framed and hung in the back office of Pinnacle Motor Group. Not in a place of honor, but in a place of instruction. Eye level, beside the door, where anyone going in or out would pass it and could read, if they chose to stop. The last line: I believe this place could still be what it said it was. I'm just not sure anyone is going to say so out loud. Someone had said so out loud. What you do with it is the whole story. He always had. He always would. Drop a comment right now and tell us, have you ever walked into a room and been made to feel like you didn't belong in it? Because this community knows that feeling, and we want to hear from you. If this one found somewhere real in you, tap the like button for every person who waited 3 hours to be seen and stayed anyway. Subscribe if you're new here, because the next story is already waiting, and it is going to hit just as hard. We will see you there.